Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, April 22nd, 2013, start of a brand new week. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of holdover from last week. The corporate media is still out there pounding the Boston bombing as hard as they can, and everybody's pointing fingers. It's the right-wingers, it's the Saudis, it's the space aliens, it's Bigfoot, it's all the rest of this stuff. And it's kind of crumbling. This whole propaganda operation right before their eyes. Before we get into that, of course, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. In our third hour today, Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth will be our on-air guest, talking about the latest developments in determining exactly what did happen back on 9/11, and we'll be catching up with him as well. Now, getting into the story, obviously, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the Boston bombing, but I do want to point out where the official story is starting to fall apart. We just had an online poll at my website. Do you trust the official story of the Boston bombing? And 98% of the respondents said no, they do not. The remaining yes respondents, I presume, are all the various intelligence operatives that are monitoring my site on behalf of various governments here. A lot of things have come up over the weekend. The Boston bomber posted a final farewell message to the Russian equivalent of Facebook, in which he said, "I didn't do it, they set me up." And I think that's becoming the consensus opinion for anybody not hopelessly enslaved to the corporate media here. Now, interestingly, we had this weird situation with Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the younger suspect, who is supposedly in the hospital with a very serious throat wound that prevents him from talking. And earlier they were saying, well, it's going to really hamper our ability to ask him questions. Well, he's a star student. We presume he can write and use a computer, and now they're claiming to be getting information out of him. But again, this whole idea of a throat wound is kind of strange for two reasons. First of all, Russia Today published a photo of Dzhokhar climbing out of the boat under his own power, and there are no indications of a throat wound, no blood down the front of his shirt, which would definitely be happening. And according to the Los Angeles Times, the attendants in the ambulance that took Dzhokhar over to this Beth Israel, whatever it is, hospital where these Israeli doctors are taking care of him, according to those ambulance attendants, he was swearing at them. So this idea that he was injured in a way that prevented him from talking in the boat is already starting to fall apart on that one. Now, let's see. The aunt, she's been on TV a couple of times saying these kids would not do it. They're being set up. She has now positively identified the naked man in the videotape as Tamerlan, the older brother, the martial artist, the Golden Gloves, the guy who was going to try out for the U.S. Olympic team. And remember, when we saw the video, and you look at the face, could be him, may not be him, blurry tape, but looking at that muscular physique and comparing it to the photos on his martial arts photo album, it does look like him. And the aunt is saying, yes, that absolutely is him. So the question is, they had him arrested, they had him stripped naked, he was perfectly healthy when they put him into the patrol car, and then all of a sudden he turns up dead, and the official story is that he was shot and then run over by his younger brother. And it appears that that may be just part of this whole demonization campaign, because yesterday a woman called into a Boston area talk show, corporate media show, said she was right there where it all went down. She was staying with her boyfriend, and said that what she saw was the suspect was run over by a police SUV, then he was shot. We'll be right back after the Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about this eyewitness to the arrest of the older brother who called into a radio talk show in Massachusetts last night. She was spending the night with her boyfriend, couldn't go home unfortunately for her, because everything was locked down. Stay in your home, citizens. And so she was out there, and the report she called into this talk radio show is the naked suspect, which the aunt is now saying that was Tamerlan, was run over by a police SUV and then shot multiple times. And she goes on to say this guy was not holding any pipe bombs. He was not wearing any kind of a suicide vest. And then, of course, we have that situation with the younger brother, who was photographed. This was run on Russia Today. Photographed climbing out of the boat under his own power, obviously not critically wounded. No sign of a throat injury or blood coming down from throat injury onto the front of his clothing. And then it was followed up by the second image of him being on the ground, being tended by the FBI and all the rest of that. And the implication is he was shot after he surrendered and somehow survived, and it was too obvious for them to try and go back and shoot him a second time. Now, you probably are as familiar as I am with the sheer flood of photos and videos that they put out about these two brothers. New York Post, of course, put out a photo of the completely wrong suspects. It was not the corporate media's best week last week in reporting this story. But you know the one I can't find? The FBI keeps insisting they have a video showing one of the brothers actually planting the bomb. I haven't seen that video. I can't seem to find it. I did a web search for it, and I see this video being talked about in the corporate media, and they're all talking about, yes, we have a video that this guy did it. I'd kind of like to see that video, check for any kind of fraud and chicanery. And I'm not the only one who's checking photos and videos for fraud and chicanery. Everybody is suspicious on this. Now, another little thing to keep in mind. Originally, the FBI went through this dog and pony story. We have no idea who these two are, and they put out all the pictures all over the media. Make sure that these are the bad guys, these are the suspects, and they just kept hammering us with those photos over and over and over again. And the FBI initially denied any contact prior to the Boston bombings with the Tsarnaev brothers. It has since come out the FBI was in regular contact with them. 2 years ago, a foreign government had asked the FBI to investigate Tamerlan Tsarnaev, and they found nothing at all, nothing derogatory. And apparently it's now come out that before they went public with this dog and pony show of the photographs, the FBI called Tamerlan on the phone and said, we'd like to talk to you about what you were doing there at the finish line. So the FBI knew who these guys were before they did that whole dog and pony show of the photos for public consumption and asked for the help of the American people. So the situation is it's obvious. They're lying. Another one that was used to demonize the brothers. Oh, they held up a 7-Eleven. They held up for 2 days, they were going on saying these two brothers had held up a 7-Eleven. Now they're backing off and admitting it was a completely unrelated crime. Kind of makes you wonder where that photo of the younger brother, supposedly from the 7-Eleven security camera, came from. And did you notice how badly tromped on it was? Somebody went and contoured it and edge detected it and tried to make it look like it was a poor quality security camera, hiding something up there. But now they're saying, no, these guys did not rob the 7-Eleven. How convenient to demonize them, to let the story float for 2 days. Now it has since come, oh, and by the way, the fact that the 7-Eleven was robbed proves that military crackdown martial law thing obviously didn't work. The criminals still were comfortable going out robbing that 7-Eleven store. It has now come out that these bombing suspects, we have been told they had bombs and guns and they were getting gunpowder and all the rest of that stuff. Turns out they didn't have gun permits. They don't have any prior experience with firearms. And yet we're told they got into a running gun battle with the police. At the very least, it proves gun registration isn't going to work. At the very worst, it proves somebody else was on the other side of that gun battle with the police. And it's kind of interesting because in looking at this story, this unidentified driver of the hijacked vehicle, Remember, that whole story just feels like somebody's trying to plant information in the public eye. These two guys hijack this car. They tell him right up front, we're the Boston Bombers and we just killed a police officer. And then they drive up to a gas station, convenience store, and both these guys go into the convenience store together, which of course is the golden opportunity for this hijacked driver to skedaddle and run to the police and say, oh my goodness, I just saw the Boston Bombers, they hijacked me, they admitted they killed the police officer on the grounds of MIT. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. So what I think happened is a third party, part of this whole false flag terror attack, shot that police officer dead at MIT. In his car. He was not out of his car. Somebody just walked up to his car and pumped a bunch of bullets into him. And then they go out and they hijack this car and they say, we're the Boston Bombers. We killed the cop. And then they just literally walk away and let him escape. And by the way, the driver of the hijacked car has not been publicly identified, which means nobody from the corporate media or the independent media can walk up to him with a picture of the actual brothers and say, are these really the guys who hijacked you? Which would be an obvious question at this point. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Ed in Los Angeles. Aloha. Ed, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, this is Ed in L.A.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell me that pressure cooker bomb, I thought pressure cookers need, like, electricity. Is that like 9/11, the terrorists took down the planes with knife cutters? I mean, save me.
Yeah, well, the idea of a pressure cooker bomb is you don't need electricity because you're filling it with explosives. The idea of using a pressure cooker is that it initially contains the explosive while it combusts. When it finally lets go and ruptures, it flies to shrapnel. Basically, the pressure cooker serves the same purpose as the bomb casing, and it's the fragment.
You need electricity.
No, you don't need electricity if you've got a bomb inside. If you've got batteries and a timer and a detonator feeding into a bunch of black powder, you don't need electricity other than the battery that's inside.
Why don't you just use any kind of container then?
Well, you can pipe bomb anything that is strong enough to initially to contain the blast and then rupture into fragments makes an ideal bomb casing. Pipe bombs, obviously, pressure cooker bombs. And by the way, the pressure cooker bomb was something that was actually invented by the CIA and developed with the Afghanis during the Soviet situation there as an improvised explosive device. But any metal container that is sturdy and able to initially contain the explosion in order to build the pressure and the shock wave and then turn into fragments can make a good improvised explosive device.
They carried it on their back.
That's what we're being told. But, looking
you tell
at...
me they can carry it on their back when it's smoking hot.
It's not hot until it detonates, but it is heavy. We're talking about a pressure cooker that is filled to the top with gunpowder, ball bearings, nails, batteries, detonators. You're probably looking at about 30 pounds. And frankly, that pressure cooker that they identified as the one that was being used looks a little large to fit into those backpacks. So it's another reason to suspect the story.
That's like box cutters, right?
Yeah, it's a plausible fiction that does not stand up to close scrutiny. Okay?
I got to let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Bye-bye. Now, we're looking at these other stories. Over in Great Britain, the European press is already starting to hem and haw over the situation. The Independent in Great Britain had a story out there that basically said Tamerlan Tsarnaev was nothing out of the ordinary. He was a friendly giant. They're talking about his whole background. It is so inconsistent with the idea of somebody who's just going to bomb the Boston Marathon. The guy was a star pupil. He'd won scholarships. So was his younger brother. He had a cute girlfriend. He was a rising martial arts star. And you know, in the United States of America, that's a path to film stardom. Was getting ready for the Golden Gloves. Was trying out for the U.S. Olympic team. Does that really sound like somebody who is going to all of a sudden, out of a clear blue sky, blow up the Boston Marathon? He's a patsy. And now we're finding out that he's been in contact with the FBI off and on over the last 3 to 5 years, according to his mother. Sounds to me like maybe he'd been recruited as an informant. And we know that informants for FBI, CIA, whatever, are very often sacrificed as patsies. Lee Oswald being one. All right, we're going to take another phone call. George in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. What is on your mind?
Oh, yeah, the FBI knows about this back for 2 years, and they haven't done anything.
Yes, that's right. The FBI investigated him fully for terror connections 2 years ago. They found absolutely nothing. Nothing derogatory was in his file. Okay, we got to take a break. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And there are more and more questions coming up about this whole Boston bombing situation. A lot of it centers on the fact that there was a bomb squad drill taking place during the marathon. One of the people who has been interviewed on TV says it's the only foot race he ever went to where they had a bomb squad standing by, and it turned out to be the only race he ever went to where there was an actual bombing. Now, what's really kind of interesting, there were loudspeakers saying it's only a drill, it's only a drill, it's only a drill, and the Boston Globe newspaper tweeted ahead of time there would be a controlled demonstration explosion near the library. Now, afterwards it was spun to say, oh, they meant the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, and that seemed to be a good story until you go into Google Earth and you look at the street where the bombings took place, and right across the street from the location of one of the bombs is the Boston Public Library. And if you go back to the original Boston Globe tweet, it doesn't say anything about the JFK Presidential Library. It simply says the library. The Boston Globe tweeted, officials, there will be a controlled explosion opposite the library within 1 minute as part of bomb squad activities. They announced it ahead of time. And the library they're talking about is the Boston Public Library, which is right across the street from where one of the 2 bombs exploded. So this thing just gets freakier and freakier. And, of course, we know that initially the officials tried to deny there was a bomb drill in progress until too many people came forward about that. Now, we've been hearing that the younger brother couldn't speak because he had this throat wound. And then the FBI turns around and says they're hunting a 12-man terror sleeping cell that Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsaniev were allegedly a part of. They're just flinging this stuff all over the place. CBS has finally admitted that, yes, the FBI interviewed Tamerlan Tsarnaev, investigated him back in 2011. The mother of the brothers insists the FBI had been in regular contact with them for up to 5 years. Initially, the FBI said, we don't know who they are, we've never been in contact with them, and it wasn't until Russia Today and the European papers started pointing this stuff out that the FBI said, oh yeah, we did know who they were all along. Now remember, if they act like they've got something to hide, they've got something to hide. Of course, everybody's out there screaming their favorite villains, right-wing extremists, and so forth and so on. Glenn Beck over the weekend was teasing everybody with this story, if the government doesn't come clean, I will blow the lid. Well, he's come out with this announcement. He's trying to link the bombing to the Saudis. It's those gosh darn Saudi Arabia, blah, 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 blah. And Beck is out there serving his masters, putting the blame on Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is a major political threat to Israel for a very simple reason. Saudi Arabia takes all that money they get for selling the United States oil and gas, they turn around and they pump that money back into the United States. They invest a lot of money here. Trillions and billions of dollars. And that kind of money coming in buys you a lot of political clout. And that's a problem for Israel, which is taking billions and billions and billions out of the United States, angering the American taxpayer, but still wants to be in complete control of the U.S. government. So the Saudis are a major problem. A lot of Americans are saying, why shouldn't we listen to the people who are putting money into our country instead of the country that's sucking it out? And so the Israelis have a very strong motive to demonize the Saudis, and Glenn Beck is out there running that whole propaganda. But just stop and think. The Saudis have billions, if not trillions, of dollars invested in the United States. They're not going to risk having it seized by the United States government because of an act of terror. If Saudi Arabia actually wanted to destroy the United States, all they have to do is ask for their money back, all at the same time. The U.S. economy would collapse, and it would be perfectly 100% legal for Saudi Arabia to do. They don't need to bomb a foot race. All they got to do is call in the loans, and it would all be over. So Glenn Beck is out there. He's trying to tie this in. Oh, we've got to hate the Saudis. Love Israel. Hate the Saudis. Hate Qatar. Hate the United Arab. Hate all Arabs. Let's just simplify things. Hate the Arabs and love Israel, and all will be well. And, of course, it won't. Going to grab a quick phone call here. John in Missouri. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I just wanted to say that our government has lied to us so much for so long that if they told me the sky was blue, I'd have to go outside and check.
Yeah, I'd take a raincoat if I were you.
Anyway, we have no faith in our government anymore. That's all that's happened.
But that's absolutely true. Pew Research did a poll last week, and their numbers were that only 30% of Americans still trust the federal government. We ran our own poll on whatreallyhappened.com, and we came up with about 3% trust the U.S. government, which I presume are all the FBI and CIA and whatever spooks who are keeping an eye on what we're doing here.
Well, that was my statement.
All right, you got it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I got to tell you, let me give you a little story. Over the weekend, I made a point of talking about Boston with everybody I encountered at the Feeding the Hungry program, at the supermarket, just running our errands, over at the hardware store buying plant pots and just talking to people. And the reaction I got was, oh, it's a terrible thing these brothers did. And I said, are you really sure the brothers did it? Or it's just another government story? And I found that everybody was ready to listen to the possibility this was a false flag attack. And as a matter of fact, Google Trends reported that over this last week, false flag terrorism just spiked as a search term. Everybody's looking for this. I imagine it was a huge embarrassment on C-SPAN where they're getting multiple callers calling in and saying, I think this is a false flag to take away more of our rights. So this one is already cratering. And, of course, the corporate media is out there obediently trying to demonize these two brothers. Oh, there was a domestic abuse complaint against them. These are terrible people. And they've stopped interviewing everybody who knew these two brothers, except for this one uncle who's out there saying, oh, they were radicalized, they were this, they were that. And yet if you go back to his first video interview, the first thing he said is, I've had very little contact with these two people. But he's the new media star because he'll just say the official story and he's getting all the coverage. The interviews with the parents, the aunts, the teachers, fellow students, getting a lot of play in foreign countries. They're all but banned here in the United States on the corporate media right now. So what we are seeing here, along with another USDA choice bovine excrement false flag, is that it's not getting the traction. It's a very skeptical public we have out here. The independent media is actually doing the job the corporate media pretends to do. We're asking the questions. We're pointing out the inconsistencies. And people are listening to what is going on. Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about for what was this hoax staged? To anger us all against Muslims all over again? I don't think that's going to work. When a white guy robs a bank, do you start saying all white guys are evil? When a black guy steals a car, do you say all black guys are evil? There's an epidemic of child molestation among the clergy. Do you run around saying all Christians are bad and ought to be under surveillance? Only with Muslims, because of the brainwashing we've been getting from Hollywood and the corporate media, do you take any single allegation of wrongdoing by a Muslim and apply it to the group as a whole. For any other group, it would be considered racist and wholly inappropriate. But if you're talking about the Muslims, well, that's okay. They deserve it. So we're seeing all this push, this idea, they're using this Boston bombing to justify suspension of the Miranda rights. You don't get a lawyer. We think you did something really icky-poo. We saw how they abused terror suspect and national security. Now they'll abuse this. They'll come up with more and more reasons why you don't get a lawyer. You don't get a right to remain silent. It's a terror investigation, national security. We got to get rid of that whole pesky Constitution thing. And by the way, we're hearing that again. Remember we were commenting about a month ago, we were seeing these articles in New York Times and CBS where they're talking about really the Constitution is outdated and our federal government could operate much more efficiently if they didn't have to follow all those pesky rules, like freedom of speech and certainly that Second Amendment thing here. Lindsey Graham was out there championing that cause over the weekend. Boston proves that the homeland is the battlefield. In other words, you are all now potential enemies of the state. 330 million Americans are now automatically suspect. The federal government is declaring war on the 50 states, is what's going on here. And Graham went on to say the Constitution is obsolete. We've got to get rid of it in the interest of the national emergency. And the United States government is clearly following Hitler's playbook. Dictatorship for Dummies, the 2013 edition. Hitler's brown shirts burned the Reichstag. Then they framed a guy named George Dimitrov with the ultimate agenda of angering the German people against the communists. And because it was the Reichstag, the German parliament was stampeded into passing all these laws granting emergency extraordinary powers to the Führer, which ushered in the Nazi dictatorship. And it was just a gigantic hoax. And here in the United States of America, after 9/11, we got the USA Patriot Act. Then we got the NDAA Acts. Now we're getting CISPA. They're using these phony terror attacks to push a political agenda. And right now we're hearing from more and more people. Bill Maher was going out there saying, we got to get rid of that Constitution. Okay, guess what? I'm fine with that. Let them dump the Constitution. Toss it in the shredder. Best thing that could happen, because the authority of the federal government is conferred by that Constitution. If the Constitution is gone, so is the legal authority of the federal government over we, the people. If there is no Constitution, there is no lawful federal government. Now, I'm certain the boys in Sodom on the Potomac will hold to a different idea, that they can go on bossing the rest of us around without the legal foundation of the Constitution. But for ordinary Americans, you need to keep this in mind. The end of the Constitution is the end of federal government authority. Their authority over we the people rests on that document. If they shred it, they're basically signing their own resignation, or abdication as it may be. That Constitution is the original contract with America, the agreement by which we the people allow the federal government the authority to run this nation for the benefit of we the people. If the government tears up that contract, they're out of a job. If they tear up that contract, we the people are under no legal or moral obligation to obey that government's dictates, to pay its bills, certainly not to send our children to die horrible deaths in that government's wars of conquest to enrich the private central bank. So go ahead, Mr. Graham. Go ahead and shred that Constitution, because that, sir, is your resignation from office. We're going to grab a phone call here. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, not much, Mike. I was going to tell you that, the Boston bombing is fake. Sandy Hook is fake. The American paper dollar is fake. Everything the Congress says and the Senate, all of them, is lies. The only thing that's real is the availability of Silver Eagles, namely the 2013 one, isn't really available. I mean, I've been having a hard time getting my silver. Yeah, the
mint's having to ration them because they can't find the physical silver supply. It's all dried up.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to go to the coin shops now and continue my collection.
Yeah, you probably will have to, and you will probably pay a premium over spot to acquire physical. The price of physical silver and gold is breaking away from the paper trade value. And by the way, gold is on its way back up.
Oh, I know it's way up. They took it down with naked shorting, probably.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's all. One question: the 2013 Silver Eagle, that's just a round, as you called it before, right?
Yeah.
Silver round.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily the value of the age of the coin. It's the content of the silver. Right?
Yeah, it's the content of the silver. You want to stay away from buying numismatically valuable coins or collectible coins because that valuation just fluctuates all over the place. If you're buying silver and gold physical, you want to buy for as close to the melt value as you can. That's why a lot of people talk about the so-called junk silver. These are the pre-1965 quarters and dimes in this country that may not have any collector value, but they're still silver, and you can get them for close to the melt price.
Right. You know, I hope after this is all over that we go back to some kind of a silver and gold based barter system or trade. Eventually, people are just going to have to come out of their shells, and see, who the enemy is, and hopefully in my life I'll be able to see it, but eventually it's going to happen. That's my opinion.
No, I'm in agreement with you. The word is getting out. I think the fact that they're not getting a lot of traction on this latest hoax, coupled with the fact that our audience demographic is definitely reaching the younger and younger people, makes me feel that we're pretty much getting into the end game. And this whole model of rule by artificially created debt, I think, is going to come crashing down, and we're going to see a huge leap forward in human civilization, for the benefit of the human civilization, not for the private bankers. All right, we're going to let you go here, and before we take another phone call, I want to make a point to put things in perspective. Okay? During the Boston bombing, 3 people were killed, and 170 other people were injured. Okay? Now, just picking a day at random, last January 28th, in the same state of Massachusetts, 60 people were killed on the job in one day, January 28th. 80,000 people were injured on the job. Actually, this is back in 2011, the last full year for which official statistics are available. A lot of people are being killed. Car accidents take more. 12 people were killed in that Texas fertilizer plant explosion. Much more property damage. It's not getting the news coverage Boston is, rather. It's not news. It's a sales pitch. It's a propaganda campaign. Ooh, bad Muslims, bad Muslims. Just think about bad. Pay no attention to exploding fertilizer plants or exploding Gulf oil platforms or melting down reactors or GMO food. That's, real Americans don't think about that stuff. Just Muslim, 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 Muslim. And remember, it has now been established that every time President Obama sends out one of these drones to murder a terror suspect for who has not had his day in court, for whom no evidence of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt has been provided, 50 innocent people are killed around that suspect. That's an average. Every single drone strike. And the corporate media, no big deal. They're Muslims. They deserve it. So let's just put these things in perspective. Only 3 people died in Boston. And it's a tragedy for the families of those 3 people. But when you look at the disproportionate news coverage that this was given over and above what happened in Texas, and certainly over and above the innocents being killed in these drone strikes, you begin to realize it's not really news, it's just more propaganda. By the way, there's been another incident with a U.S. strike on a school in Afghanistan that killed 3 people. Are we going to see a week of nonstop coverage about this atrocity? I rather doubt it. All right, moving right along here. We're starting to see the ramp up trying to sell us war with Syria because it's full of Muslim bombers, and war against Iran because it's full of Muslim bombers. And they're just ramping this up. Now, this nation, have been at war for 11 years now. That's a long war in the modern age. The United States has been invading and conquering all of these nations that wanted to sell their resources for currencies other than the dollar and refuse private central banking longer than we were in World War II. And now they're out there screaming that we've got to overthrow Syria. Syria's the new evil bad guys. They've hit a roadblock on that one. The head of the Syrian opposition, meaning the hired mercenary army, Ahmed Moaz al-Khatib, is resigning. This is the second time he threatened to resign. First time back in March, they basically sent him some money and said, here, please stay in charge. But apparently he's going to quit again, and it's expected it will throw the Syrian opposition into utter chaos. There'll be faction fights. They'll start killing each other instead of killing the intended target, Assad's troops. Benjamin Netanyahu is out there once again screaming, only a military threat can stop Iran. From doing what? Building power stations? Manufacturing medical isotopes for export, which just happen to compete with Israel's products in that same area. They're back to the same thing. Ooh, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. It worked. We got you to invade Iraq with weapons of mass destruction. Why won't you believe us with Iran? Well, because you lied to us about Iraq. Big, huge, steaming pile of bovine excrement. We're going to go back to the phones. Alex in Texas. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. I was calling because, in January I wrote an email to you about how it wouldn't surprise me if we started seeing bombings and explosions aimed to destabilize the civilian population. And the reason I remember that is because I don't know if you remember, but I'm from El Salvador, and I've seen this happen before. Like,
yes.
I was 5 or 6 years old when it happened, and I just remember, how the government attacked itself, and then it blamed, false flags, and I'm having the feeling that that's the same thing that's kind of being conjured here, and I just don't think that they've taken into account the fact that we're so informed right away,
mm-hmm.
and the fact that the United States is a lot more homogenous, you could say, than in the sense of liberty than perhaps Europe is, or perhaps even Yugoslavia, because they had the same thing happen in Yugoslavia when they balkanized it right before.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing the things that are going on and the way people are reacting. And what I'm trying to tell people is, hey, just, you know what? Don't worry about anything. Just watch your money. Watch your money, because that's the big play. Because when you're emotional and when you're, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess feverish. You tend to forget the logic. And
well, that's the whole goal. That's the whole goal of keeping a population afraid, is so they're not thinking calmly and rationally. But like I said, my experience over this last weekend talking to people is their initial response was they would parrot what corporate media was telling them, but they were clearly very ready to listen to, seriously, alternative explanations. And I think that's a major breakthrough. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another caller after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a lot of people were asking about the black and tan gentlemen who were running around the scene at the Boston Marathon. Who were they and what they were doing? And it turns out they are part of a U.S. military team designed to seek out, find, and potentially defuse weapons of mass destruction. They were the only U.S. military team assigned to New York City to support first responders in case of disaster. And apparently, because of their stellar performance down there in Boston, they are going to stay in business. Secretary Hagel was going to defund the unit and shut them down, but huzzah, huzzah, we had a convenient terror attack, and the money will keep on flowing. We're going to go back to the phones. Diane in Michigan. Aloha, Diane. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I just had a comment. You were talking earlier about the Constitution.
Yes.
And from things that I have read, at the time the Constitution was drafted and accepted, the federal government as it is outlined in the Constitution did not exist. Only the creators of that Constitution could possibly change it or abolish it, and that is not anybody within the federal government.
Well, as a matter of fact, if you look up at the top of the preamble, it'll tell you who does have the authority to abolish or alter the Constitution. It says, "We the people." And there are very specific restrictions in that Constitution regarding changes the government can make. It's called the amendment process, which the government has not always followed. We know that the government loves to play fast and loose with the laws. Laws, that's just for the common working people. We're above the law. We're politicians. We're money junkies. We serve a higher purpose, our personal greed. And basically, the government that we have right now is certainly not what was envisioned by the Founding Fathers. But taking this step that they simply want to trash the Constitution, sure, go ahead. Because ultimately, the legal authority of the federal government rests on that Constitution. If they trash it, we will no longer have a lawful federal government in this nation. I'm not sure that that would be a bad thing.
Understand that. It's just the fact that the creation somehow has acquired more power than those who created it, and I'm at a loss to understand how they can abandon it. Their actions already tell us they have.
Well, they just want to convince the rest of us that, for the good of the nation, to protect it. It's a replay of Nazi Germany's enabling acts, which suspended legal protections for ordinary Germans, and that basically allowed the Nazis to do whatever they wanted to, and that's clearly the goal of what's going on here.
Well, people need to understand they have a part to play in it, and I certainly hope they do. Thanks for your time, Mike.
You got it. Thanks an awful lot. All righty. Now then, getting back to the Mideast area. Oh, there's the music. We've got to take a station break. We'll be back after these. Aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 2 of our show. And, of course, we're 1 hour away from Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth joining us to talk about latest developments there. Getting back to the Mideast, New York Times is reporting officials in Israel stress readiness for lone strike on Iran. And that's followed up by a story that we saw over in Russia today. Israel prefers U.S. to do the job in Iran. Of course we do. Those Israeli children are far too precious to waste in these wars of conquest. That's what the Americans are for. And we understand that an Israeli attack on Iran will not be lone or solo, because already the United States Senate has passed a resolution saying that if Israel decides they want to start a war with Iran, the United States is committed to coming in to the war on Israel's side. In other words, the U.S. government has just ceded the authority to declare war to a foreign government. Now, getting back to that Constitution that the federal government would like to get rid of, wars are only allowed to be created by act of Congress. Under the War Powers Act, which is a relic from the days before instantaneous global communication, the President can deploy U.S. military forces to anywhere on planet Earth for a period of 30 days. After 30 days, dealing with whatever the emerging crisis may be, the President is supposed to go back to Congress for a formal declaration of war. Otherwise, the troops and kiddies all come home. And presidents have been abusing the War Powers Act ever since. I'm not even sure when the last officially congressionally declared war happened, but they give them euphemistic names. It's a police action, it's an intervention, therefore we don't have to worry about the Constitution and the Congress going along with this whole situation. Israel's also making stink face at Syria over their dangerous weapons. Oh, it's that whole weapons of mass destruction thing again. Be afraid. They've got nukes. They've got gas. They've got germs. They have waxy yellow buildup. Be afraid. Throw your children onto the designated bayonets and don't ask questions. If you think for yourself, the terrorists are going to win. France and Great Britain are saying they have absolute proof of use of chemical weapons from a soil sample smuggled out. And they say they're convinced that Assad did this. Really, when you've got the remnants of a chemical weapon in a soil sample, there's no sign in there saying I came from that direction. So it's just more propaganda. I think we were talking last Friday about the fact that Patriot missiles are being deployed along the Jordan-Syria border. So between those Patriots on that southern border and the Patriots that are already along the northern border with Turkey, most of Syria is now, for all intents and purposes, a no-fly zone for Assad's Air Force. If they go up in the air, they're going to be shot at. Whether or not they'll be hit is another matter entirely. The Patriot isn't as good a performer as we've often been led to believe. Let's see. Netanyahu's out there screaming, Syrian weapons of mass destruction, a worldwide terror threat. They're just hyping this as hard as they can. Be afraid. We got bombs. We got... And, you know, this is really a very familiar pattern because we get this terror attack, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more in Boston to scare Americans. That I don't think has worked. Followed by propaganda to blame the Muslims, followed by an escalation to push for wars in Syria and Iran. Does this sound familiar? It should. It was the same pattern we saw after 9/11. Big bang, letters filled with germs to Congress to stampede them. Ooh, bad Muslim, bad Muslim, bad Muslim. We must go to war. We've seen it before. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We are now getting word that the surviving brother, the Boston bomber, is charged with using weapons of mass destruction. Now, call me picky, but I always thought weapons of mass destruction were something like, well, the United States used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where you're wiping out entire cities and populations, not 3 people. But they're charging with using weapons of mass destruction. Supposedly, the charges were sealed. Have no idea why that would be the case. And, of course, as soon as it was announced the charges against him were being sealed, they were immediately leaked. So this whole thing is just degenerating into a media circus. Now then, getting back to the Mideast here, very interesting story. Apparently Israeli soldiers who were shooting at peaceful demonstrators used a handcuffed Palestinian teenager as a human shield. In other words, they're shooting at these protesters, who are not really shooting back, which was lucky for the Palestinian teenager, and they're hiding behind this kid. And they're putting him out in front, and they're shooting around and over his shoulder. As Ron White says, you got to be a real manly man to do something like that. Oh, look at the brave Israelis shooting at protesters and hiding behind a Palestinian. Yeah, not very good. Now, China is deploying Navy ships to patrol the islands that are disputed with Japan. So that situation is starting to ratchet up there as well. And understand that, yes, there's supposedly a lot of oil and gas underneath these islands, and they are fishing grounds, although they may be radioactively contaminated by now. But the real goal here for the United States is war with China means isolating China from the rest of the world politically and, most importantly, economically, because China's gold-backed yuan is looking really, really good as an international currency compared to the U.S. dollar, which is floundering. And already more than 10 nations have made direct currency exchange deals with China to go back and forth between their economy and China without going through the U.S. dollar. And that is really what's keeping folks up late at night over there in Washington, D.C. Let's see. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this whole situation with gold, because gold is on its way back up. It's sort of bumping in around, but we saw this huge smash down of gold prices last week. And the agenda, there were a couple of overlapping agendas, but one of them appeared to be to try and spook ordinary people into rushing down to their coin dealers and the We Buy Gold kiosks at the shopping mall and just dumping their gold as quickly as possible at rock-bottom prices, there to be snatched up by the central banks, which are dealing with a huge bullion shortage. We keep hearing news that the COMEX may default on their paper contracts sometime in the next month, and if they do, they want to be able to buy off those contracts for cash at a lowered price, which means they'd make a lot of money. All the people who bought the paper contracts are going to get hammered. COMEX will make a bunch of money. But the reality is this takedown of paper gold triggered an unprecedented global run on the physical. And starting late last week and continuing into this week, we have seen a large chasm opened up between the paper, silver, and gold contracts and the actual physical deliverables. I think the last time I checked, coin dealers are doing a $7 to $10 over spot per ounce of silver, and gold is edging close to $500 over spot. So this idea that the physical gold and silver and the paper gold and silver are the same price, that's gone. Absolutely gone. And these falling prices sparked a gold rush. People are taking advantage of the low prices to stock up on physical. So this idea that this was going to scare people into selling their physical gold so the banks could grab it did not work. So gold is back above 1,400. We're getting reports all over the place. Sales of gold coins are soaring. We know that the U.S. Treasury is having to ration the silver eagles. They can't find enough raw silver. Now, there's a wonderful video that we link to at whatreallyhappened.com called The Secret World of Gold. It's a three-parter. And it talks about the history of gold and the desirability of gold. And what's really interesting, I put a couple of comments on this post here, because if you look at part 2 of the three videos, starting at 11 minutes and 10 seconds, there is a great explanation of how these gold and silver prices are being manipulated. And they say right in the documentary, this is illegal, this is criminal, but they're doing it and the government's let them do it. Then if you go over to the part 3 of the video, starting at 4 minutes and 30 seconds, there is a confirmation there that these private central banks have been leasing other people's gold to the bullion banks, who then sell it out. And so for the private central banks, they're still technically claiming that the gold is safe in their vaults because it's only rented, but it's just not there. It was a huge scandal. One of the big banks, they were selling these paper silver contracts to say, oh, you've got this much silver in our vaults, and then they were charging the customers a storage fee for holding the silver in the vaults. The vaults turned out to be empty. There was no physical metal. It's just a position in our investment strategy. And there was a class action lawsuit. They had to refund all the storage fees. And then back in part 3 again at 9 minutes, they talk about how Hugo Chavez demanding Venezuela's gold be repatriated triggered a gold panic in Europe. And then, of course, on top of that, the German gold repatriation. So it looks like there is a huge gold run about to happen, that is going to take down all these central banks. First and foremost, you need to understand everybody was lying about this thing. This bank that was charging their customers a storage fee for silver that wasn't being stored, that's criminal. And everybody on the inside of the bank had to know it was a hoax and a fraud. Nobody came forward. It's just the new normal. Anything to screw the customers and the investors is considered absolutely acceptable behavior. So, anyway, over in China, they've had another banker commit suicide jumping off a tall building in Beijing. Good start. And we were talking about how our demographic, the average age of our listeners and readers is trending down. And it's a very, very positive sign here. And these two kids made a video as a school project called the Currency Act Newscast. And it was such a joy to watch because the kids get it. They get the message. The government and the banking system isn't what their schools are teaching them it is. And they're picking up on it. And that's a really, really positive situation. More economic news. Apparently, 40% of the people currently in jail in New Jersey are there simply because they don't have enough money to post bail. 40%. If they had money, they could be out on the streets working to repay their bail bondsman or whatever. Millions of Americans are too broke to even have bank accounts. And, of course, these payday loan centers are cleaning up on that situation. I want to talk a little bit about immigration and the new immigration bill. Apparently, the latest polls are definitely trending against amnesty. I mean, they were making a big deal about how Tamerlan, the older Boston bomber brother, alleged Boston bomber brother, I think he was framed, he should have been deported because there was a domestic violence charge against him. In a nation where they don't even deport the illegals, and they're about ready to make a whole bunch of them legal citizens, despite the fact that in their home country there are warrants out for some very, very serious violent crimes. But, well, come on in, we're going to make you a citizen. Here's something that is really going to curl your hair. Under the immigration reform bill, there will be a financial incentive to employers to hire a newly legalized immigrant ahead of a U.S. citizen. $3,000. If I'm running a business and I have 2 job applicants of equal qualification, and one is a U.S. citizen who was born here, lived all his life in America, and the other is one of these instantly legalized illegal aliens, if I hire the instantly legalized illegal alien, I get $3,000 from the government. Gee, I wonder how that is going to influence hiring decisions. And now you, the legal American citizen, are a second class beneath the illegal aliens. Just think about that one for a while. Apparently there's a big scandal over at Georgetown University. They're trying to hush that up. They had this woman who was working in admissions. Black woman was just throwing out applications from white students. Didn't even send them through the process, just shredded them. Huge scandal. They're trying to cover that one up here. Discrimination goes in all directions. It does. And one of the worst mistakes we can make is we can be so overcautious about not discriminating against others that we fail to see it when we ourselves are being discriminated against. Over in Germany, Merkel is definitely feeling her vitamins because she's out there saying to the rest of Europe, prepare to cede sovereignty. And she's basically out there saying that for the European Union to survive its present financial crisis, and especially to expect Germany to go on picking up the losses, that there has to be a true unified European Union, one government, one bank, one people. Now, Merkel can't deliver, because as long as that European Central Bank issues all the euros as a loan at interest, Europe will continue to sink into debt. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Interesting development just crossed my desk. Earlier in the show, I was talking about how all of the friends, family, parents, fellow students, teachers who were interviewed about these 2 brothers accused of the Boston bombing were all saying the same thing. These guys couldn't do it. Not in them. They're good people. They're not violent. They don't talk about violence. There was nothing negative against them. Remember, the FBI has finally admitted, under pressure from the foreign media, that they did, in fact, conduct a complete investigation of the older brother 2 years ago, and they found nothing at all. And all these other parents, teachers, and everything, their interviews are going away, and the corporate media is focusing on this uncle who's out there saying they were radicalized by outside influences. And in his first interview, he admitted he didn't have a lot of contact with his 2 nephews. But he's out there, he's the star of the corporate media because he's supporting the official story, and huzzah, huzzah, terrorism, there's a threat, we've got to be danger. Well, it turns out that this uncle used to work as a consultant for the United States Agency for International Development, acronym USAID, a U.S. government agency often used for cover by agents of the Central Intelligence Agency. And he worked for them over in the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan during the early 1990s. The guy is a spook. He's an asset. And by the way, Putin just kicked USAID out of Russia because he knows they're not there to bring aid or assistance or development. They're basically there working to foment a covert overthrow. USAID was in Iran leading up to the failed coup of 2009. So this guy is outed. He's a spook. Now, getting back to the economy, we've been talking about the so-called haircut in Cyprus, more like a castration, where the banks just simply said, well, we're running out of money again, we can't print up any more new money, or we destroy our own currency, we're just going to help ourselves to your savings accounts. And they went in and they just started scooping out of people's savings accounts and said, this will save the economy. Turned out it didn't. Cyprus is still 17 billion euros short of being able to balance their books. But, hey, they got away with it in Cyprus. We're going to do it elsewhere. And they're talking about, looting savings accounts in Italy, Spain. We know that the outline for next year's budget in Canada has a bail-in facility in there. The government of Canada is trying to claim, well, we're not really talking about savings account. Oh, really? What are you talking about? And then you get that silence. Switzerland just rewrote their 1934 banking laws to allow bail-in deposit confiscations. The contagion is spreading. And this is Switzerland. They supposedly have a lot of money. So it is going to come here to the United States. And because this attempt to stampede us all into selling our gold voluntarily has failed, somewhere down the road there will be another Roosevelt gold confiscation. And by the way, they were talking about that a little bit in the History of Gold video, and they showed that a lot of people did surrender their jewelry, even though technically gold jewelry was exempt. But they turned it all in, and it all got melted down, and it got sent down to Fort Knox. The question is it still there? Nobody really knows. The last time anybody did a full count of the American people's gold bullion in Fort Knox was 1953. I was 1 year old the last time they actually checked the gold in Fort Knox. Anyway. You probably noticed this over the last week. A lot of big quakes all over the place. China, Japan, nasty one in China. A lot of damage there. Quakes in Oklahoma, probably tied into fracking. Mexico, Iran, Philippines, Indonesia, Chile. The earth is sort of getting all kind of upset. Sinkholes opening all over the place. Maybe the Mayans were right, but just off by 1 year. Apparently, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is refusing to release details on food stamp profits. And the issue is that they're refusing to make public how much money individual retailers make from food stamps. And the question is, since this is taxpayer money that is being supposedly sent to help our fellow Americans, should there be a profit margin in there at all? Over in Greece, things are not out of the woods there. Apparently, there was a factory that was using labor imported from Bangladesh. Apparently, it was a strawberry farm. And these Bangladesh immigrants had not been paid in a considerable amount of time. And when they stood up to the owners of the strawberry farm and said, "We demand payment," apparently some of the foremen simply opened fire on these migrant workers, simply gunned them down. And it was a crowd of 200, mostly Bangladesh immigrants, wanting their money. And several wounds. Nobody actually died. But it's just another reminder of just how screwed up the global economy is under these private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I guess last week's tragedy in Boston was a major disappointment for the gun grabbers, because they were trying to find some way that they could spin the Boston bombing to say, oh, we've got to block guns, we've got to do this. And yes, guns were involved in the subsequent firefight, although that turned out to be hoisting on their own petard, because neither of these two brothers had any of the paperwork associated with owning firearms. So either the firearms were planted on them somewhere along the way to demonize them, or gun registration doesn't work. See, that's the problem when they have these false flag operations. Even the people who are accepting the story at face value, which according to our poll is about 3% of the American people, they're saying, obviously, if this is the true story about the Boston bombing, all of this surveillance doesn't work. Getting our crotches grabbed at the airport doesn't work. Having our luggage looted by the TSA doesn't work. Getting cancer from the scanners doesn't work. Scanning our email didn't work. Scanning our social media didn't work. Listening to our phone conversations, none of it worked. All these TV cameras did not work. Let's stop wasting money on all of this stuff. Now we're seeing the FBI is admitting they investigated this guy 2 years ago and found nothing negative about him. If you accept the official story at face value, it proves the FBI was completely incompetent. They investigate people, they don't find anything. And so it's time to basically just shove the whole thing. But the gun grabbers are out there, you know, they're still smarting from the defeat in the Senate. And Obama's out there, he's taking it as a personal affront, he's screaming, you know, he's saying, sooner or later, we're going to get this right. I see this is just round one. Okay, Mr. Former, we are told, constitutional professor, what part of shall not be infringed do you not get? At the very least, in a nation where the police will not intervene to save you from violent crime, where the courts have ruled the police do not have an obligation to intervene to save you from a violent crime, common sense, along with the Second Amendment, says we, the American people, the law-abiding citizens, have a legitimate right to keep and bear firearms equal, if not superior to, those in the hands of the criminals. And we know the criminals have got all these guns the U.S. government wants to ban. They're getting them from Fast and Furious. Or maybe there's a whole bunch of them floating around from that warehouse in Kuwait that was left unguarded, and 20,000 M16s went walkabout. Okay, we got some callers on the line. Ryan Dawson. Aloha, Ryan. Welcome to the show. I loved your comment about the Japanese quakes. Ryan, are you there?
Yeah.
There you are. Okay.
Hey there, yeah.
So what's on your mind?
We just joked in Japan when we had all the quakes that it must have been Maggie Thatcher hitting the floor of hell.
I like that one.
I stole that all the time.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, earlier when you were talking about Fort Knox, I was just going to suggest a guest, Bill Still. He made the Money Masters series, and I think he'd be a great person to have on.
All right, we'll try and get him on then.
I can help you out with it.
All right.
I'll get him on. Yeah.
Okay.
But that was all. And the last comment I had, one thing he said about the FBI proving their incompetence. It could be proving their incompetence or proving they're looking the other way on purpose, because they do that a lot too. We have to remember they've had 49 cases of entrapment since 2001 that we know of.
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering if this was supposed to be another false alarm that went wild the way it did in 1993. I mean, the fact that the Boston Globe was tweeting that there was going to be a controlled explosion across from the library, which is where one of the two bombs went off, I mean, that basically tells us this whole thing was scripted from top to bottom, just like 9/11.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Russians have said he'd met with militants in Chechen 6 times at least, and the FBI wasn't sharing any information or listening to him, so I have to lean more towards let it happen than, or even worse, than just their own incompetence.
Well, there's certainly evidence in both directions. I mean, the FBI had the entire Japanese plan for the attack on Pearl Harbor in August of 1941 and did absolutely nothing with it. So, you know, whatever's going to go on.
They provoked that. They had their boats in Japanese waters and have been attacking the Japanese in Manchuria before Pearl Harbor.
Well, there was that whole 8-step plan that Arthur H. McCollum at the ONI drew up and gave to Roosevelt on how to provoke the Japanese into the attack, because Japan was the backdoor against what Roosevelt really wanted, which was war against Nazi Germany.
Yep, you got it. Well, I'm going to let you do your show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Pat in Great Britain. Aloha, Pat. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Pat, are you there?
Just a couple of observations, really. You're talking about gold and silver. Just talking about the spot price of the physical as opposed to the paper and the premiums. And then obviously I'd make an observation about gold confiscations. You mentioned that. I just looked at 2 completed auctions on one of the well-known internet auction sites. 20, one ended yesterday and one ended today. 20 U.S. Walking Liberty Eagles just sold for $674. That's a roll of 20, not one. That's 20, working out as a premium of about $10 each per coin. Now, normally you'd think you'd pay a $10 premium if you're just buying one or two from a coin shop, but to have to pay a premium of 10 per coin, so that's about $200 odd premium over spot, is just staggering and just shows how the spot price of has no bearing on what you actually pay for the physical at the moment. The other auction was slightly less, about $652, which works out at about a $9 premium, working on about $23, the so-called spot price. So it just shows that the immense premiums that these coins are fetching for people who actually want to take possession of the physical. Over here, the demand is not quite as high for silver because we have to pay VAT, which obviously you can get back when you sell the coin. The price takes into account the fact, but you can buy silver quite readily here, although you're paying probably a $2 to $3 premium plus VAT as well. Obviously, sovereigns are very much in demand. You'll pay between 250 to 300 pounds. Ones have a more of a numismatic value. So that's just an observation, really. I just thought I'd make, and then I'll just give you my view on confiscation.
Yes.
Yeah, the conversation. Okay, I just thought you might want to say something, but anyway, confiscation. My view is this: back in the 1930s, surely there was a huge amount. There was much more trust for the government back in the 1930s, the early 30s.
Yes.
And of course, Britain went off the gold standard. It was seen very much as doing your patriotic duty. Hand in your gold, please. We're linked to gold. We've got to increase the money supply to get the economy again. There was much more respect. So my first point is, who has got respect for the federal government today to obey any possible edicts that they may introduce in the North American context? Who respects them? No one. Secondly, how much are they going to get from the private population? Less than 1% of people own anything of any value, really. I mean, the odd gold ring or something, or maybe the odd sovereign under a pillow somewhere. How much are they going to really collect? And also the cost of collecting it, the cost of policing it, and having people go around door to doors or writing to everyone. It's not worth their while to try and collect it from the population. They are trying. You see, back in the 30s, they didn't have the futures market to try and spook people, as you were saying, and I think that you were probably right. I think they were trying to spook people away from the investment. So I don't think that it's going to work, and I don't think they're going to try and bother to do a ruse like that, a mass of gold collection, gold coin collection, and jewelry collection like did in the 30s.
Well, I agree with you. It's going to be too expensive to go door to door, searching for gold and silver coins. What they're probably still thinking is that the American people are just as gullible as they were back in 1933, and if the government says, please, you've got to turn in your gold because we need it, that probably a significant portion of the American people will just go ahead and send it on in. But I don't think it's as large a proportion as the U.S. government and the money junkies are thinking right now.
Yeah. I mean, how much are they going to get? I mean, less than 1%. I mean, people like Max Kaiser and all that have been banging on about, their crash JP Morgan sort of thing and they're saying if only something like 2% or 3% of everyone in the world bought a silver, or something like that. I mean, the percentage of people that have actually bought some precious metals are still so tiny.
Well, I'm not sure that there are accurate figures. I mean, most people, certainly if they're following our advice on our show, if they're buying gold and silver, they're intentionally buying it in amounts too small, so there is no paper record, and they're certainly not bragging to their friends and neighbors, hey, I bought a couple of gold coins and I brought them home with me, because that's an invitation to have your home broken into. So by its very nature, small-scale private citizen possession of silver and gold is going to be very covert, and I don't think that we do have accurate numbers as to what is really out there. I don't know how much gold and silver my neighbor has. I've never actually asked, and therein, I think, is why it's very difficult to say. And the U.S. government could very easily be in the same position. They're probably looking out there and saying, well, we have these large purchases where the IRS documentation had to be filled out, but for these smaller purchases, somebody goes by the coin shop on their way home from work every Friday and they buy a coin. That's 52 coins in an entire year for which there is no record.
Yeah. I think whatever they managed to collect, and of course it was very crucial back then. As I say, it was on, obviously it was a patriotic duty. The US was on a gold standard, which they're not on a gold standard now, although other pundits would think, well, we are on a de facto gold standard in types. And I just heard that Arizona apparently have just made, gold and silver legal tender now.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, they have, and a lot of other states are starting to look at that. You need to understand that while the Federal Reserve note is legal tender in this country, it is not by law the only tender. And this is why the bankers trying to shut down like the Liberty Dollar and these alternative currencies. It isn't actually legal to do that because people can use for money whatever they mutually agree to use as currency. The whole point of shutting down alternative currencies is to keep us borrowing from the Federal Reserve. Because if people stop borrowing from the Federal Reserve, that whole Ponzi scheme comes crashing down.
Yeah, sure. Just one final comment. What's the latest on that chap who issued his own rounds and called them dollars?
That was Bernard von Nothaus, who actually designed the medallions for the Hawaii state government. Yep. And he had the Liberty Dollar, and they had a face value on them, but they were not made to be confused for U.S. currency. And people left him alone until he put Ron Paul on the coins, and at that point, George W. Bush, apparently succumbing to his ego, said, you shut those people down. And they were trying to say that it was technically counterfeiting because he put the word dollar on there. But if you go around American communities, they have their trade dollars. Zimbabwe uses the word dollar. It is not, in fact, a copyright or trademark of the U.S. Federal Reserve or the U.S. Treasury. I think it was just George Bush got his feelings hurt because they wanted to put Ron Paul on the coins instead of him, and that's the real reason that the Liberty Dollar got shut down. Okay?
Hilarious. But anyway, it's just interesting to see, to see whether going back to the spot price thing, what happens in the next few weeks with the price differential, and obviously whether the COMEX really will default as people are talking about it if they can't get enough gold, precious metals in to fulfill futures contracts. I mean, obviously they're talking about the precious metals in backwardation, where the price in the future is less than what it is, spot at the moment. But interesting time to see what happens.
Well,
that's all, Mike. I better let you get back to the show.
All right, thank you very much. You do need to look at that 3-part video that's on the front page of what really happened right now, The Secret History of Gold, because when you get into the second half of Part 2 and pretty much all of Part 3, it shows what an absolute disaster has been created with all this paper contract trading. There simply is not enough physical to satisfy these contracts. It has to collapse sometime. Maybe they'll survive the next month, but look at all the gold future contracts that were dumped on the market a week ago last Friday. 400 tons in a single lump to drive the prices down. When those contracts come due, if they don't have the gold to satisfy them, there's going to be panic. We know that some of the banks in Europe that trade in gold, some of the brokerages rather, have defaulted. They're trying to buy out the contracts for a cash plus premium, but they can't keep doing that forever. And so it's really, really coming apart at the seams. We're going to grab, let's see, Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I called in while you were talking about guns, but now that you're on gold, I'd have a question for you.
Yeah.
Where can someone check the amount of gold that has been mined, total amount of gold, to kind of get some idea of what's out there as far as gold supply?
Well, I believe, in fact, this is even referred to in that documentary, The Secret History of Gold, that all of the gold ever mined in history is enough to fill 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's all there really is. And, it's reused and reused and reused, and they're talking about how much of it is now scattered on the bottom of the world's oceans. There's a lot of treasure hunting going on out there. But that really seems to be as much as there really is. And that, of course, is a big problem for the gold futures contracts because the output of the mines just isn't sufficient to meet that demand. And we know if you watch a lot of reality TV, and I don't, there's the Alaska Gold Rush reality show. Now they've got the one where they're diving to the bottom of the Bering Straits and trying to mine gold down there. It's really rather amazing. I understand that down in Southern California, up in the San Gabriel National Forest, that there's a lot more gold panning going on. It's supposed to be for recreational purposes only, but back during the Depression of the 1930s, there were gold miners' camps set up there that were basically panning for gold and mining for gold for subsistence wages. And so that's starting to come back into fashion. I know that there's a lot of gold mines that were shut down when gold was still only a couple of $100 an ounce because it didn't pencil out to spend the money to get the gold. Those mines are being reopened and redeveloped because obviously gold is much higher in demand and much higher price for it. So everybody, the gold rush is on. There's gold and then there are hills. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Scott in Virginia. And, Scott, you had another comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, Mike, just one quick question on the gold and then to the gun thing, which I really talked about. Now, the gold, what I'm looking for is some source of information where I can kind of trust on what the volume of gold is in the world so I know I'm not buying into some De Beers-type sham where they get a cartel on diamonds and the diamonds aren't worth nearly what they sell them for. I just want to make sure that there's not more gold in the world than we've been told about.
Well, if there was more gold in the world than we're being told about, we wouldn't see all this game playing going on with the gold futures contracts. Those Dutch banks, those Dutch exchanges would not have had to default. So, and I understand in this particular time in history, it's very hard to take anything coming from the government and the corporate media at face value. But what you do is you look for the after effects. And I agree with you about the De Beers cartel. They're always shouting diamond shortage, diamond shortage, diamond shortage, and yet there's enough diamonds where every woman in the world has one on her ring. There's always 2 or 3 stores full of them over at the shopping mall. So yeah, it's the illusion of rarity that drives the prices up, and they're just carbon crystals. Are they doing the same thing with gold? Maybe to an extent. I imagine the people who have been buying up the bullion as fast as they can are not making it public how much they have acquired. But I know that you can go out and do a couple of web searches on, gold statistics, and you're basically going to, I think another measure I had was that all the gold ever mined in history would make a cube 16 feet on a side was one that I heard. But you're right, they could be fudging the numbers. And again, because so much gold was lost onto the floor of the ocean with all the Spanish treasure ships and wartime convoys that were being attacked that were trying to ship bullion around, there could have been more. It's basically, I think, a guess or an estimation. But obviously, if there was more gold available than we're being told about, we wouldn't be seeing these gold bars floating around Germany with the hallmarks of Fort Knox and tungsten cores.
Well, thank you for answering that. And my main concern is not so much gold, but that's what you were talking about at the time, but it's steel.
Yes.
And that is the government trying to come after our guns. And what really upsets me is how can anybody that lives in the United States, any part of the United States, think that after just a few terrible school shootings, that any sizable majority of Americans are ready to give up their guns. We didn't give up our guns before, during, or after the Civil War.
That's right.
That's the one thing the North and South agreed upon was the right to bear arms. They agreed about nothing else.
Well, I think one of the reasons the gun grabbers aren't getting any traction right now is that most Americans are now aware of the link between prescription antidepressants and acts of violence. And the Boston bombing undermined the idea that guns cause violence because guns were not involved in that. Again, before the gun grabber agenda, Fox News was admitting there's a link between these SSRIs and acts of violence. That's what we need to get rid of. Guns don't cause violence any more than cars cause drunk driving. In both cases, we're dealing with a chemical that makes responsible people act irresponsibly. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Gage. Welcome back to the show. We're still waiting to connect with Richard Gage. We should have him here in a couple of minutes. Interesting story coming out about the 7-Eleven robbery that took place that was initially blamed on our two bombing suspects. A statement from the manager of the 7-Eleven store says the guys who robbed us don't look anything like those suspects. And they just say, I have no idea why they tried to say it was them. Somebody was confused or lying. And, of course, as the Boston bombing false flag craters, we've got a new one. They're upping the ante. Apparently up in Canada, they have arrested two men. A 25-year-old man arrested in Toronto, 30-year-old man in Montreal. The RCMP says they received training and support from Al-Qaeda and they were going to blow up a train. So they're out there just selling that idea. Muslim terror, Muslim terror, Muslim terror. Repeat after me. Muslim terror, Muslim terror, Muslim terror. All righty, joining us on the air is Richard Gage. He is a member of the American Institute of Architects. He is a founding member, the founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He's been an architect for over 24 years. He's worked on major tall building construction, including fireproof steel-framed buildings. That's an important thing to remember. Richard Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched Richard Gage's own quest for truth about 9/11. And Richard, thank you for spending time with us today. And obviously, the last time you and I spoke, we were sharing these very bohemian accommodations in New York for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So how are you right now?
I remember well, and I'm doing good, Mike. It was great to meet you then and to hear your voice again and to be on your radio program with your listeners.
Well, obviously, the first question is, what is the latest development in Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth? I know you've gotten a lot of visibility with that Ed Asner. You just had this wonderful little contest that generated all these amazing little graphic designs. What is next for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth?
Well, the 1,800 architects and engineers that I represent are very excited about this year's activities, because while we have largely relinquished our expectations, which were lofty, relative to getting government officials and media representatives to be responsive to the facts and the scientific evidence and the truth about what really happened on 9/11, we are going to the public. And we're excited about that. We have raised $100,000 to put ads in the subway systems, bus systems, and other vehicles for raising the public awareness in September. September 1st through 30th, there will be a massive effort in the first ever 9/11 anniversary global media ad campaign. And so the whole 9/11 Truth movement is gathering forces and creating local opportunities to receive these matching funds, because we are hoping to generate $250,000 in this effort to wake people up. So your listeners can learn more by going to our website, which is ae911truth.org.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break for commercials. Richard, do not go away. I'm going to keep you here as long as I can for this remaining hour. I'm sure our listeners have got questions. We'll be and aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Richard Gage, founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I have just linked to his website from the top of whatreallyhappened.com, so you can go in there, you can read all the presentations, look at all the work that they have done up to this point. And Richard, believe me, I empathize when you talk about your lofty ambitions of getting the government and the media to look at the actual evidence. I went through that myself back in 1994 when, quite by accident, I stumbled over evidence that White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster had been murdered and then was covered up with a phony suicide, and I went to my friends over there at the TV networks saying, look at all this, I got the evidence, I got the FBI lying in their FD-302s, and they said, oh, we can't touch that, it's our jobs. And of course the next thing I know, I was blacklisted out of Hollywood, and my career evaporated. And so I understand what you feel like. We are raised to believe that we have a government that really enforces the laws, that we have a media that wants to report the news, and it can be quite a bit of a psychic shock when you realize, no, they're part of the lie, and they're part of the hoax, and they're not going to respond. They're just going to sit there and say, I don't see it, I don't hear it, and you can't make me nya, 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 nya. So what is, to bring our audience back up to date, have there been any new recent developments in terms of new evidence surfacing regarding what happened on 9/11?
Well, to 90% of Americans, World Trade Center Building 7's destruction on 9/11 is new evidence. And that is what we are bringing to their attention in September on this massive ad campaign. That's what has garnered the attention of the architects and engineers specifically, because they design buildings. They've seen buildings like Building 7 come down before at free fall acceleration symmetrically into its own footprint. That can only happen, as you know, with controlled demolition. Explosions going off from pre-planted, pre-placed, and pre-timed devices. And in the case of Building 7, which, again, most architects, engineers, and others know nothing about, as soon as they see it, they go, well, of course, that's a controlled demolition. This thing drops as fast as a bowling ball falling off the side of the building. No resistance from any of the 80 columns on any of at least 8 floors, because it fell for that distance at free fall. So at 5:20 in the afternoon, this building goes down right next almost to the World Trade Center North Tower, and we're told that it came down by normal office fires from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And there were a few fires in this building, but they were fairly small and scattered, and even if they were large and engulfing the building, they could not have brought the building down. I mean, there has been over 100 examples of very hot, very large, and very long-lasting fires in skyscrapers, and not one of them has come down until 9/11, when we have 3 in a row come down symmetrically and almost free fall in the case of the towers, Twin Towers, very explosively in that case. So this is new evidence to most people.
Can I insert a comment here? Because as you're probably already aware, the video that most people have seen of Building 7 come down was edited to conceal certain things at the beginning, like you can actually hear an explosion in the distance. And the other part of it is, you know that little penthouse up there at the top? How that sort of caves in first? That doesn't make any sense for a building that is being brought down by fire for that little penthouse to come down, except that is where the support beams were cut first to drag the rest of the building in toward the center, which again is the hallmark of controlled demolitions. But you're absolutely right about the fires. There was a few fires in a few office windows. There was no hot, molten core. We just had another office building, I think it was in Russia, completely engulfed, top to bottom, still remained standing. And you need to remember that World Trade Center Building Number 7, the Solomon Brothers building, was a building designed to rent out to federal government offices, and because of that, it was built much stronger, more fireproof, more bomb-proof than ordinary buildings nearby. The federal government buildings are always built extra tough to deal with the possibility of a threat. So the idea that this building, overbuilt, extra strong, extra sturdy, extra fireproof, came down in its own footprint from a couple of office fires, it's simply unbelievable.
That's correct, Mike. It is unbelievable, and And architects, engineers, and others don't believe the official story. Once they know what the official story is, and once they see the evidence and realize that these are controlled demolitions, then they know that they've been lied to. Then their interest is perked up when we start talking about the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Twin Towers exhibits a whole host of problems also for architects, engineers, and everybody else. It's quite easy to see, actually. For instance, we're told in the case of the Twin Towers that we have this 12-story block above the point of jet plane impact, which drove the rest of the building down to the ground due to the structural weakening at the point of the fires and the jet plane impact. But that's not at all what we see in the videos. What we see is that upper 12 stories, is consumed in its own, like a miniature controlled demolition, just telescopes in on itself before there's any downward movement past the point of jet plane impact. In other words, this mass is completely disintegrated. The structural steel frame shattered in what's obviously a series of explosions or implosion in the first 4 seconds, just like Building 7. And then after that, there's nothing left to drive the rest of the building down to the ground. It's a bunch of disassembled structural steel components. And yet what's happening after that, after the first 4 seconds, is this incredible series of explosions, just like the first responders talked about. Bands of explosions wrapping all the way around the building, pop, 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 like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. There are a couple of quotes from these first responders who were recorded in October of 2001, but the American people didn't have access to these 118 first responders who recorded specifically testimony that talks about explosions and seeing flashes of light, many of them, at the onset of this part of the destruction.
Actually,
laterally. What?
As I to just insert here a minute, if you're familiar with the Naudet brothers documentary on 9/11, he has some of the firefighters in that documentary talking about how Building 7 comes down, boom, 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 and one of the firefighters says it looked like a controlled demolition. So that's another confirmation.
Yeah, and what happens is at that point, these 4-ton structural steel sections are thrown laterally at 60 miles an hour. Physicists have clocked this. Gravitational collapse works downward, not outward. 60 miles an hour laterally, these sections are landing 600 feet, and they're trailed by thick plumes of pyroclastic-like smoke clouds.
Mm-hmm.
This is extraordinary. I mean, what is going on here? Well, the ends of these beams are described by FEMA author and fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett as partially evaporated.
Yes.
So, describing the damage to this structural steel as Swiss cheese in the case of Building 7 from the few elements of structural steel samples that they actually saved, because most of them were illegally destroyed within weeks after 9/11. But the ones that they saved contain heavy erosion and sulfur invading the steel. It's absolutely amazing. Sulfur is added to thermite, which becomes thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel like a hot knife through butter. So it's evident that incendiaries were used because first responders and structural engineers and cleanup workers all found these pools of what they called molten steel. Turns out to be molten iron.
Mm-hmm.
Molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. So this is very, very important evidence that has been overlooked and whitewashed by the 9/11 Commission, by FEMA, who did the first report in 2004, before NIST, who took over and threw all of this evidence of Appendix C out the window from the BPAT report from FEMA's May 2002 building report. This is amazing. And then they also completely threw out these curious iron microspheres which were abundant in the dust samples, billions of them. Characteristics of the dust, they said, is not even World Trade Center dust if it doesn't have these microspheres of iron in them, which are about the size of the diameter of a human hair, and they're everywhere, and they can't explain it. Well, molten iron is only explainable as a function of thermite and incendiary, and being spherical, it's only explainable as if formed in air, i.e., from an explosive aerosolizing event.
Okay, Richard, we got to take another break for commercials. I'm sorry to keep cutting you off. When we come back, we've got some callers waiting on the line with some questions. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Richard Gage of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And, Richard, we got a whole bunch of callers lined up who'd like to talk to you, and we're going to start with Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Richard Gage?
Yes. Is there documented evidence of government officials saying that they were running mock drills on 9/11 where planes were to fly into the building?
Yeah, I do believe there is. I have not done the research on those drills, but you can certainly find that out easily by Googling 9/11 war games. One was called Vigilant Guardian. What was the other one called, Mike?
I forget the name of it. I'm more focused on the fact that FEMA admitted they were on the ground near the World Trade Center the night before it all happened.
Yeah, they were staging another exercise for a biochemical attack in downtown Manhattan. So Tom Kenny from FEMA said we were all set up and ready to go on the morning of 9/11.
What was the name of the war game that they were playing? What was that name?
Vigilant Guardian was one of about 20.
Yes, NORAD was running a drill simulating multiple airplane hijackings crashing into buildings, and it's one of the reasons why there was a lack of immediate response to the real hijackings, because all the air traffic controllers just thought it was part of the drill. In fact, on some of the air traffic controller tapes that have been made public, you can hear the controllers saying, "Is this real or a drill?" And, how very convenient for our terrorists, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that there was this NORAD drill that just confused all the radar controllers, so nobody knew what was real and what was just a simulation.
And I heard that there were also mock drills on the Madrid train bombing. That's correct, too, isn't it?
Yes, and there was also an ongoing terror exercise in London during the 7/7/2005 bombing. That simulated multiple train bombings, and we found out through our own research that the week before that happened, somebody was in the Muslim neighborhoods hiring Muslims to play pretend bombers for the purpose of this drill. Obviously, if you're having a bomb drill, you've got to have bombs for the bomb squad to find. It could very easily be that these two brothers were set up to be the bad guys in the Boston bombing, thinking they were just carrying practice bombs. And trying to place them and see if the bomb squad could find them. Because if you don't have practice bombs to find, there isn't much for the bomb squad to do on the drill except stand around eating donuts and drinking coffee.
Well, that's incriminating evidence right there. I mean, if we can get that type of thing on video where there's government officials stating that they were running mock drills on these terrorist attacks, I think that would open a lot of eyes, but we need to get everybody aware of the fact that this is their strategy that they use to commit terrorist acts. You guys have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, initially the U.S. government denied there was a bomb drill going on, but too many witnesses in Boston have come forward to say, yes, they were hearing it on loudspeakers. Now we have that tweet from the Boston Globe that announced a controlled explosion across from the library a couple of minutes before it actually happened. And, of course, that's where one of these two bombs went off, right across the street from the Boston Public Library. We're going to go to another caller, Chris in Florida. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The afternoon, Michael and Richard. Thank you. Richard, I had the honor of meeting you last year during your visit here to the Tampa Bay area. And I want to point out, of course, that when you debated Dave Thomas, when you come and you visit a place that you also do debates. So to throw your support behind you and architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, because of that, Dave Thomas, whom you debated, on his own Facebook picture of himself, he has his eyes changed to red reptilian eyes. So I wanted to point that out, but my question had to do with him that during your debate, he had admitted, per my questioning, that he had not seen the documentary that you just put out, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. He'd only seen a few parts of it online, and he wasn't curious about the Pentagon videos. But, that's the best they can do against the likes of Richard. He really deserves support for his dedication in analyzing what I know you're trying to focus on is the engineering and architecture. But if I may offer that Webster Tarpley has interesting research for 47 different exercises going on 9/11, and that book would be covered in 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in the USA. The latest edition, he has up to 47 now, so I know it was much fewer earlier. But as for back to Dave Thomas, my question has to do with, have you seen the video? It's a multi-part video entitled Academic Dave Thomas Talking About Law Debate with Richard Gage, where he has made several concessions, and I was wondering if he had publicly conceded those points to you, if you've seen that video.
No, I haven't. I would like to see a link to that if you'd be willing to send it over.
Sure.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials here right now. We're going to be back with more phone calls and Richard Gage after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to phone calls for Richard Gage, I feel like I need to make a point here because, as we mentioned earlier, there is already this situation where they're talking about a terror attack up there in Canada, and they've arrested a couple of people. And now all of a sudden we're getting all this word. They're trying to hype this terror thing. There are 3 hospitals in Alabama that have received bomb threats, a courthouse in Connecticut, an elementary school in Utah, a shopping mall in Pennsylvania, another one in Iowa, office building down in Florida. So remember when Boston first happened a week ago, I speculated the possibility that we might be seeing the beginning of a coast-to-coast campaign of terror to try and get everybody afraid and ready to go to war against the evil right-wing Christian, conservative, Muslim, Iranian, Al-Qaeda, North Korean, Chinese, blah, 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 blah. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Do you have a question for Richard Gage?
Hello, gentlemen. I believe the operation you guys were looking for was amalgam Virgo.
Yes.
Yes. So, Mr. Gage, everything you're doing for humanity is fantastic. The history books will look kindly upon you. My question is, your information is so solid. Do you feel that you've been harassed, audited, surveillance, or anything like that?
No, I haven't had a problem. I'm delighted to report. It's also kind of disheartening in a way. One would expect a little more reaction from the powers that be that stand to lose a great deal from a rising public awareness of these issues. And, of course, Mike and myself are deeply involved in the important efforts in the 9/11 Truth movement. Have you experienced anything like this, Mike?
Yeah, from time to time. I mean, last Christmas when Obama came out of his vacation, they had the Secret Service checking us out. They sent one of their guys over to this church where we run the Feed the Hungry program, and he was trying to pretend he was a new member of the congregation and checking us out, so we made him carry all the heavy stuff.
Oh, perfect. Put him to use. Well, I'm really glad you're not harassed. One more question. Is there a way we can financially support you? What? Is there a way we can financially support you?
He wants to financially support you, yes. Yes.
Correct. Is there a way that science can support us?
No, he's asking if there's a way that he can financially support you. In other words, if somebody wants to make it...
I get it now.
Okay.
we had some crosstalk. Yes, absolutely. We have a project right now, Operation Tip the Planet, that is extraordinary, and people can learn about this on our website at ae911truth.org. We are looking for donor support to raise our seed money from $100,000 to $200,000 right now. We think if we do that, we may even get up to $500,000 in total, including local support for projects as grassroots supporters organize themselves in each of the metropolitan areas around the world, actually. We will fund $1,000 of billboard money or a poster in one of the subways during the month of September or on the side of a bus. We're very excited about this because we think it'll gain media attention as well because of all of the rapid transit ad-buy opportunities that we're going to be engaging in. So does that sound of interest to you?
That sounds fantastic. Yes, I will do that. I also I print out some of your information and I put them above urinals in bars and restaurants.
Yeah, well, I guess we can get their attention.
You got 2 minutes of uninvited attention, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks a lot, fellas.
All righty, and
arrested.
Okay, we're going to switch over to Carl in North Carolina. Aloha, Carl. Do you have a question for Richard Gage?
Yes, thank you, Mike. Yes, I wanted to ask about the demolition of the towers. There have been a couple of would-be debunkers about the thermite theory. I know that there was a Dr. Millett, for one, that have claimed that they found nothing other than just paint chips and rust-proofer chips in the debris. And I wanted to find out if you had any conclusive evidence to confront that, and also if you considered any alternative theories about the demolition of the towers, such as micro-nukes.
Okay, Richard, let me cut in here first and foremost. Because I want to answer these issues that got brought up. First of all, we have photographs of the load-bearing members of the World Trade Towers showing a diagonal demolition cut, including melted iron running down from the cut, and there is no other explanation for those cuts on those load-bearing beams. And we have them standing behind the firefighters, in the ruins of the World Trade Towers. This story about micro-nukes is of the same category as the claim there was no plane at the Pentagon. It's put out there to make the whole discussion look silly. The reason being, if you're looking for a small explosion, why use a nuke anyway? They're hideously expensive. They leave radioactive traces. You can get the same effect with thermite. Occam's razor applies here. This whole micro-nuke thing, it's like the no plane at the Pentagon. It is intentionally planted nonsense and junk so that Popular Mechanics and the New York Times can sort of make fun at those of us who do not buy the official story. So, Richard, your response to that as well.
Dr. Millett did do a study. It is not published in a peer-reviewed paper. Its intent was to refute the 24-page peer-reviewed paper by the team of scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, which did review 4 independently collected samples of World Trade Center dust, finding nanothermite composite materials. We're talking about small red-gray chips that are in all the samples they collected that are composed of extremely small particles of iron oxide mixed with aluminum powder. These are the ingredients of thermite, especially in the percentages in which they're found, 3/4 iron oxide, 1/4 aluminum. These particles are 1,000 times smaller than the human hair. They are very advanced materials that are engineered from the atomic scale up, made only in the most sophisticated defense contracting laboratories. This material was put in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, which at 420 degrees centigrade ignited, producing the exact same spheres that officials found in all the World Trade Center dust. So we know exactly where those spheres came from, even though officials had no explanation as to where they thought the spheres came from. This has now been completely proven and documented in this peer-reviewed paper, which Dr. Millett didn't even try to corroborate. In other words, raising the temperature of these chips to 420 degrees centigrade, because they would have also ignited, producing 2,800 degree molten iron as their byproduct. There is no other explanation for 2,800 degree molten iron in all the World Trade Center dust, and found in pools at the bottom of all three skyscrapers by first responders, by structural engineers. In fact, Leslie Robertson, the structural engineer himself for the World Trade Center, and also by the cleanup workers. This is extremely well documented. It's just information that has to get out to the public, to architects, to engineers, because the media is censoring it and the government officials are not interested in it. We have to go past our government officials. They are not doing their job. They're paid to do something else by somebody else other than what we put them in office to do.
Yeah, they're paid to basically lie here. And before we go back to Carl here, if you go back and you look at the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, pretty much everybody now understands it was a conspiracy. There were multiple shooters. And yet, if you remember the corporate media after that, they had an unending stream of so-called experts that were up there trying to prove why Kennedy's head would move forward, rather rocket forward from, or rather move backward from the gunshot from the school depository. You had Walter Cronkite signing on to that thing. If you look at all these experts that Al Gore was able to buy and pay for this human-caused global warming, which is obviously cratered as we come out of another record-setting winter. And again, as we just mentioned earlier in the show, this uncle of these two Boston bombers who's getting all the media play, because he's out there supporting the official story. Turns out he is a consultant for U.S. aid, which is a known CIA front. So the reality is they're willing to spend as much money as they need to keep selling the lie about 9/11, and there are sadly, tragically, people who are perfectly willing to take the money and spout whatever ridiculous nonsense there is. TWA 800, another one. Oh, it was a firework. Oh, it was this. They were all drunk. Don't believe anything they say. Because once the government starts lying about something, whether it's 9/11 or TWA 800 or Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, they can't back off. They can't say, golly gee shuckies, you caught us. We were fibbing on that one. So, yeah, there's all kinds of people who've been promoted as experts who, as Richard Gage points out, their studies are not peer-reviewed. It is simply writing what the official story is supposed to be. It's then presented as authoritative by, like, Popular Mechanics and National Geographic. But it's just, again, it's just more lies. And it doesn't matter how many times a lie is sworn to, it remains a lie. Okay?
Well, what I ask is not what I subscribe to personally.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to let you go here because we're running out of time, and we've got another caller I want to get to. Jonathan in Missouri. Aloha, Jonathan. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Richard Gage?
Aloha. Thank you very much, Mr. Gage. Thank you very much for all the fine work that you do. You inspired me to dig a lot deeper into the subject, and I do appreciate everything that you've done. Remarkable that you've not at this point had much of a danger risk, and I'm grateful for that. I do have one question. Looking at what I've also seen, the chiseled edges to the top of the steel cores, might there be a layering effect of things that were occurring simultaneously? Dr. Judy Wood, with Where Did the Tower Go? I was curious if perhaps maybe you could speak to, or maybe even expound upon your position of information that Dr. Judy Wood brings to this equation. I'll hang up and take your question off the air. Thank you very much, sir.
Sure. For all of your listeners' benefit, we have a 4 or 5 page paper that is a response to this commonly asked question of this theory, which is did directed energy weapons bring down the towers? and Dr. Judy Woods points to some interesting phenomena, mostly unsubstantiated, actually.
Mm-hmm.
We have very strong scientific forensic evidence, as we've begun to discuss here, for the use of thermite and thermate, nanothermite, that is very clearly responsible for destroying the steel structure in World Trade Center 7 and is in all the dust, indicating it was used for the Twin Towers as well, including the molten iron and so forth that's found pouring out of the South Tower and in the basement of, the rubble pile of the two Twin Towers, as well as Building 7. So we have the evidence, by the way, which she denies in and around page 124 of her book, denies the evidence of thermite, nanothermite, denies the evidence of explosions, which is provided by over 100 first responders and hundreds of other witnesses, including newscasters and so forth. Explosions at the onset of the destruction of all three towers. And she denies the evidence also for we've got explosions, we've got nanothermite, iron microspheres are not explained or suggested. And there's one more piece of evidence which is very strong, which she actually denies also. I can't remember right now what it is. But so anybody who actually denies the most basic forensic evidence that the 9/11 Truth Movement has been able to come up with is, in my mind, suspect. And providing a theory
I would agree.
for which there's no evidence provided even makes it more suspect.
Well, what they're playing here, it's a divide and conquer game. When citizens are starting to get to the truth of what's going on, it's a common propaganda technique called poisoning the well to throw out as much junk as you can. We were talking about the no plane at the Pentagon hoax, the micro-nuke hoax, directed energy. The idea is to try and get people arguing back and forth with each other over exactly what happened. Rather than allow everybody to come together and agree on a very simple fact. We were lied to by the United States government about 9/11, and that's all that we really need to know. That's the important point. But the government's propagandists want to try and trick us into fighting with each other, arguing with each other, just wasting our time and energy in pointless debates on little fine details so that we don't basically stand up and say, look, we don't need to agree on everything. Let's agree on the fact we were lied to by the government about 9/11 and move forward. Just like they're going to do the same thing with Boston. They're trying to muddy that one up. We know we're being lied to. There was a drill. They announced the explosion before it actually happened. Let's just say the government lies to us about these things to trick us into war and obedience, and it is time to let it go. Richard, we're almost at the end of another commercial break. Is there anything you want to add to our listeners regarding your website?
Yeah, we've got to have people acting on this information. We cannot sit on it. There's lots of information at whatreallyhappened.com. If you want to get specific relative to the destruction of the Twin Towers, I'm encouraging everybody to send the link, ae911truth.org, to every architect and engineer that you can find and everybody else that you know, including saturating your media representatives who are largely unresponsive, and also government officials who are the same. Please send that link out.
All righty. We're at a commercial break. Richard, we're going to let you go here. Thank you for spending most of the day with us. And again, we're ramping up to a big media push in September to get everybody looking at the evidence of Building 7, which was not hit by an airplane, was built stronger than normal buildings, came down into its own footprint, and the official story is, there were a couple of fires in a couple of offices. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and that was great getting to talk to Richard Gage again. As I mentioned when he first came on, the last time Richard and I spoke was in New York for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. We were both presenters at this symposium put on by INN World Report, and the accommodations were quite bohemian, to put it delicately. My wife is laughing in the other room. But it was an interesting time and got to meet a lot of the supporters of what really happened and talk to them. And again, the point that I made during that presentation wasn't to go over and over again all the evidence that the government was lying about 9/11, but I took the long view and I went back and I talked about all the lies the government has told you. The Lusitania was in fact carrying war munitions, and that made it a legitimate target. There were no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. The USS Maine was exploded by a coal bunker fire, not a Spanish mine. And it just goes on and on and on. The question is not whether the government is lying to you about something. It's when does it ever tell you the truth? This government controls you and rules you by lies, fraud, and deception. It always has, and until you stand up and say enough is enough, it always will. They're trying to do it again. More phony terror to demonize the Muslims, to get you ready to throw your money and the lives of your children onto the designated bayonets in Syria and Iran. And, of course, if Glenn Beck has his way, Saudi Arabia. He's out there pushing. Oh, it's the Saudis. They tried to do the same thing after 9/11. But, again, use your common sense. Saudi Arabia has billions, if not trillions of dollars of investment in the United States. They are not going to risk having it seized by the United States government in response to a terror attack. If Saudi Arabia really wanted to destroy the United States of America, all they have to do is ask for their money back. And the whole system would come crashing down. So everybody's trying to take advantage of the Boston bombing. They're all blaming their designated enemy, right-wingers, conservative Christians, the Patriot movement, bloggers like us. Everybody's just trying to exploit the tragedy. Nobody's interested in the facts and the truth in politics. In politics, the goal is, how can I use this to sell the next agenda? That's all politics is, selling you the next agenda. Keeping you happy with the lies that you won't be suspicious of. Except, of course, obviously, to judge by the backlash from the Boston bombing, everybody's suspicious, everybody is skeptical. Hardly anybody is buying this official story. And as I mentioned last week, our government, or whoever's government is behind this, had to be pretty desperate to try another stunt like this in this post-Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, post-9/11 skeptical climate. So we may see more of it. There may be more of these terror attacks coming. We're hearing about all these bomb threats phoned in all across America. They're trying to sell you the idea that the evil terrorists are out to get you. But the biggest danger you face is from your own government and from the private central banks. Those are the enemies. That's it for our show. We got to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed. Please share Republic Broadcasting and what really happened with everybody you know. Aloha, America.